So the French defense, if you are unfamiliar with it, it is e4, e6. And here white has multiple moves, but the move d4 is almost always played. At Grandmaster level, this is about 19% of the games, 90, so almost always. Online, sometimes people play different moves, but we as black will always have the same setup. So I'm going to show you what to do against d4, but even if your opponent plays something like d3 or knight f3, you can do the same set of moves, because I want this to be as theory friendly as possible. So let's get ahead with the opening. So we always play d5 with black, even if white plays another first move. And here there are really 4 main variations, but because of my theory, you will only have to study 3 variations. And study is not even the right word. Let me explain. So here in this position, there are a couple of options. We are attacking white's central pawn with our d5 push. And our main goal is basically to take out and eliminate this e4 pawn. That's why I also like to play the Scandinavian defense with the same idea of capturing this pawn. But here we have the small advantage that we have our pawn who is already protected by his friend on e6. So white has 3 options here. White could push, which is the advanced French. White could take, which is the exchange French. And then we also have 2 variations in which white protects this with a knight, which is knight to d2 or knight to c3. And technically you could even say bishop to d3, but that's not a good move in general. And you could even use the same approach against that. So I'm going to take a look at all of these, and first I'm going to take a look at the e5 move, because this is online the most played move. At the Grandmaster level this is almost never played, because it's not that good for white. So here you can already see that white has this pawn, which is kind of backwards, and that means we will be able to attack it. So straight up, we're going to attack it with our move c5. And this looks kind of like the Queen's Gambit, because if white captures this, of course that's really good for us, because we get free development, we get our bishop out, then we will be able to get his knight out and castle. So white really shouldn't take this. If they do, of course, you just have this free development. And then it's just easy, get out your pieces, this knight will go there, you will be able to castle, you will just have a really easy game. So I'm going to say white is smart and they don't take this. The best and basically almost only move for white to play here is c3 and protect this pawn. So he can always recapture. We're not going to capture straight away, but white has to protect this. Because if white plays something else, we will always just capture, and then this pawn will now become weak because it has been pushed all the way here. We can easily attack it, and this move is not really a great defensive move for white. So if white plays anything else than c3, yeah, even something like this, you can always capture the pawn. And I'm thinking also something like this maybe, but you can also just capture. So that's the main idea. So white should play c3. Well, we're just going to build up the pressure with knight c6, and we have even more attacks on this pawn. So most likely white is going to play knight f3, but even against other moves we always have the same idea and the same setup. Then I always like to play bishop d7, because in many lines white will try to put the bishop here and then pin your knight, because your knight is a valuable piece attacking in the center. If white were to go bishop b5 immediately, you can also just play this bishop d7, and if they want to take, you can even here capture with the pawn, because in the future, let's just make a move, you will always be able to try something like this as well, and you will just have a new pawn here to attack. But it's just a good thing that your knight is no longer pinned by pushing the bishop here. So what I like to do is always play the bishop here, even if this bishop has not come out yet. Here probably bishop e2 is good for white. White could also play for bishop d3, because right now this is not a pawn we can capture for free yet. But most likely they will play bishop e2 to still have the queen. Keep an eye on this pawn. Okay, and then we're always going to do the same theory. We're going to move out our knight, and then we want to put our knight here on g6. You might say, well, are you not just blundering a pawn here because your bishop is no longer protecting it? Well, not really, because we can move our knight here. We have a double attack on this, and we have a discovered attack on this. So let's say white protects this. We can capture this pawn. Yeah, even if he plays something like this, we can also capture this. It's pretty hard for white to do anything. I don't even think there's a single way to protect this pawn, because the queen cannot come up and the bishop cannot come up. So white is going to lose back this pawn, and probably he's going to lose this pawn as well. Because for example, let's say something like this. This is still pretty weak, and we will be able to attack it in the future and try to win it as well. So that's why we play knight g6, knight to e7 I mean, and this is not a good move for white. So white might castle, and then you can just put the knight here and we have a little bit more pressure. So in the future we will be able to destroy all of these pawns, and then this knight will become really good attacking the center. I'm just going to play bishop e3 here for white, logical move defending. And then here you can play your move queen b6. So you could also say, well, why would I not develop the bishop? That's definitely possible. But I like to keep the tension here as long as possible, so that if white ever captures, we can recapture. Because if you play the bishop here and white captures, well, we cannot recapture because we're going to lose a bishop. So that's why I like to play. It's actually possible here to play because of course we have this counter attack here on the pawn. But I like to just play queen here. Also, this bishop has just left the starting square, and now this is weak. So by playing queen here, we have a double threat. We are putting pressure on the center, and we're also putting pressure on this weak pawn. So white has to do something about that. So white's going to waste the move, and then I like to move my bishop. And in this order, we already got our queen out. You could say for free, because we had this attack, and this move doesn't really improve the white position too much. And if you take a moment to look at this for white, just try and find a single good move. It's actually pretty hard to find something. Because all of these pieces have some duties, and they don't really have any good squares. And this knight is just kind of horrible. He can always move a rook, or push a silly pawn, but that's not gonna matter. So I would say knight a3 with the plan of going here in the future is probably the best. And this position is still about equal. Then you can just castle. Again, try and find a move here for white. It's a bit unclear. You could say go here, because of course taking this is not good, because otherwise you will get your queen trapped. There's not a single way square you can go. So white could potentially play something like knight c2. Or white could also play rook here to protect, and then later on play knight c2. And at this point, we are going to play rook a to c8. You could also choose to move this rook, but in general, I like to keep this f6 push as a surprise in many variations. And having the rook here is really nice to at some point play this f6 push. You could even play it here, but I like to keep this as my final weapon. If white doesn't crack and white plays an amazing game, your final weapon will be this f6 push, and then everything is going to fall apart, because we have amazing pressure on this center. So what I like to do here is play my rook out, because this file, it is still closed at the moment, but you can see we're going to have some exchanges here, and this will be an open file, and then we are the ones with the rook on the open file. Okay, so I'm going to play the knight here, and now the moment has come. If you have this configuration, all of your pieces are on the right squares, so there's only one thing we're going to do now, and that is to try and break this center, because white still has a strong center. So we're going to capture with the pawn. And here you have to think or study, but I would say just think, and you will be able to find the good variations. The best thing for white to do is just capture with the pawn, but there are a couple of options. If white captures with the bishop, he has an attack on the queen, but that's not really a good move, because we're just going to take this, for example this, and we are happy because we were able to trade a knight for a bishop, and now we have these two strong bishops who will be able to infiltrate the position. If white takes with this knight, you can always capture with your knight as well. And then if he captures with the bishop, we have bishop c5. Instead of moving our queen and losing a move, I'm going to play bishop c5. And if he trades, that's fine, we can just capture. And this is still a good position, and we are even the one with some pressure here, or even moving the queen back and putting some pressure there. So that's also nice. And if white takes with this knight, well, then he just drops a pawn. It's possible to play this, but he drops a pawn. And I have to say, you have to actually take the pawn like this. Because if you take it like this, there is an amazing move. Knight takes e6. Discovered attack on the queen. The queen cannot go here. So make sure, if this happens, to take it like this, so that you can just dodge out of the way with your queen and capture the knight. But that's probably not a move they are going to play. Unless if they want to set up the trap. But you have to know the trap that you can go here with the queen. So we are going to take, and I want to say why is it going to take with the knight, because that's the only good move. And then we can play something like knight a5, which is always a plan. This opens up the rook, and also we have an amazing square to put our knight. If white blocks us with b3, we still have many plans here. And this is where I want to stop the theory, because we're already at move 14 here. But this is a good position. The engine says this is entirely equal, it's a draw. But I think black is the one here with more chances. And there are a couple of things you can do. Possible moves, knight b5, trading this. You could also play rook c7 with the idea of doubling rooks here on the open file. You could also just move a rook, because this file will probably become open in the future. And in some variations you also have f6. But I think here it's still a little bit too early to play this. I would like to exchange a little bit more pieces before I go for this f6 move. And even here, if your knight cannot go there, in many variations your knight can also go back and then jump here. But even on this square the knight is a good piece, because you're always threatening to go over there. So that is it for the advanced variation. And then now I'm going to take a look at the exchange variation, which is really easy. So exchange variations means we are going to exchange the pawns. I basically call this the copycat opening, because we are now in a similar position. If white does something, we copy it, we copy it, we copy it, and you can copy almost all of the moves. You just have to be a little bit careful and calculate, because not every move is something you can copy. You don't want to copy everything, but most of the moves you can just copy. Like for example here, this bishop, you can always just copy, and you will at least have an equal position. So you're never going to be worse here. Probably the white player is going to be annoyed at some point and try something like c4. And if they do, my tip is to not copy them. Just capture this. And now we have an imbalanced position, because this was completely symmetrical, boring, and was probably going to lead to a draw. But white will try something, because white is the player who has to try and win. If you could draw all your games with black for the rest of your life, that would be a good thing. Then you can try and win with white, and you would become a great chess player. So here white is going to try and force something. We will just take it. And then here white has an isolated queen's pawn. And isolated queen's pawn's positions have been studied a lot. Basically the goal for you is to block this pawn so that they cannot move it. And you will do that by putting a knight here on this square in the future, of course. And your goal is to make sure that this pawn cannot move. And then you will attack it with all of your pieces and try to win it, because it doesn't have any other friends protecting it at this point. And there are multiple things you can do for that. Here you could play something like bishop out, knight out. You can play knight here. If white pushes this, it's not really a problem, because we always have knight e5. So white's probably not going to do that. Let's say he also copies us. We can even play this, this. We can always just attack this. You could also play rook here, but always be a little bit careful here. There's not really a problem. And there's really no plan here for white. There's nothing he can do. If he tries to jump in, we even win material. And you can exchange pieces, because the more pieces are exchanged, the weaker this is going to be. And that's where I will leave this, because this is really low theory. You just have to play the copycat and then know this idea of making this pawn isolated. Of course, they can also play something like c3, but you can just play c6 and play more of the copycat opening as well. So this is really low on theory. This is really bad for white. Grandmasters also don't really go for this. And then here we have the variations which the grandmasters really love, but the players online don't really know. And that is the variation with knight to c3 or knight to d2. Or you could even say bishop to d3. And this move, this is the Paulsen variation of the French, and this is the Tarrasch variation of the French. And they both have a lot of theory. But I have found a way to eliminate all of that theory. So no matter which move white makes, even if they play the bishop, we are going to take the pawn. And then they're going to take with the knight. And if you take a look at this position, or you take a look at this position, it's exactly the same. So if white wants to prepare against French, they have to study everything. We are just going to play this always and have them capture. So we're always going to get this identical position. And my idea is to play this knight and put some pressure here, but I'm not going to play it immediately. You can, but I'm not going to play it, because otherwise I get my queen here, and you know, like maybe I don't want my queen here for future attacks. So what I do is I play knight d7, preparing this. Now it's white's turn to move. The best move is probably knight f3, and we're going to play knight f6, challenging his knight. And basically the only good move for white is to capture us and allow for this. And this is a great position from which we are always going to play or plan. If white doesn't capture and plays something like bishop d3, well, capture, capture, knight f6, this bishop has to move and we get the same position as we would have if, for example, we played something like this. Of course, white could also go for this, knight f6, and then maybe something like queen e2. Well, we're just going to capture it anyways, so that's also a fine position. And if in the opening white goes for bishop d3, it's the same idea. We're just going to play knight f6 straight up here, and the best thing for white is actually to just go for this retreat, in which case we can still play knight to d7 and get this position just with 2 knights on the board instead of 1. So in our main position where we get this straight, and we are almost always going to get this position, our plan is just to attack this pawn immediately with c5. Just like you would normally play c5 in the French. Even if this pawn is not here, we're still going to play c5. But white has a couple of options, the best one probably being castles, at least the most played one. If white takes, you can just take with the bishop and you now have a free bishop development and we can castle. So that's always great. You would love to have this as black. So white, if white is a good player, he's probably not going to do that. White can be a little bit tricky here if they let you capture this. They will capture with the knight, and you really have to be careful here that you don't capture this with your queen. Because of bishop b5 check. And now your queen is unprotected. So the best move is probably something like this. And just dropping your queen. So that's not something you want to play. So in this position, of course, you should take. White is going to take. If white sees the trick, maybe some players will... yeah, they won't take it. But if white is a good player, white will take it. And then we're going to play bishop c5, putting some pressure on the knight. White is probably going to defend. And it's a good idea here to always drop back with your bishop to b6. The reason why is, if you just castle, there is knight takes e6. And we have a double attack. And you lose the bishop. So I always like to go for bishop c5 and just be safe. Just drop back your bishop here to this square and you're perfectly fine. If white puts you in a check, you can just put this here. I mean, the trade doesn't really matter if we have this. And if white goes for something else, we're just going to castle, let's say this move. And then we're always going to play bishop here. And in many variations, you will also put your bishop here on this square. You can also always take in many variations and then play the bishop. But usually your bishop is a stronger piece than this knight. So I would say don't take this too early on. You still have a bishop, which is kind of like a sniper looking at this position. And this bishop might be able to join in the future. But even here, the bishop is a fine piece. And you can play something like knight d5, or in many variations, there's also rook c8. I'm just going to make a move. There's also often queen e7. I'm going to play another move here. And then often also this rook to d8. And then you just have these 2 rooks, which are pretty good. I'm trying to find some plan for white. I'm just going to play a move. And even here, sometimes bishop to e8 is good, because you now open up your rooks entirely. You could also go here, but you don't always want to exchange this. But here you could, because you can take with the rook, and then you can double your rooks in both of these ways. So that was maybe a lot, but at the same time, if you really think about this, there's not that much you need to know. I mean, the advanced variation kind of plays itself. There's always just this plan of attacking the center. You keep this for as long as possible, and then in the end you trade. The exchange variation is just copycat. This is like no theory. And then the knight variation is basically also no theory, because we always play the same approach. And then we're always going to go for this position with the bishop here. And then something like this, or as I said, something with the rooks. That's also possible. So I would say you should definitely try this out in your online games, or if you have a real life game and you think someone has prepared against your opening with black, you can always surprise them with this French weapon. And again, just a little plug, if you want to join in community with other chess players who are also very active online and want to improve, check out the link in the description. That's it for this video. See you in the next one.